Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Terra Verde, a weekly environment program co-hosted by Earth Island Journal and KPFA, and broadcast on KPFA and KPFB in Berkeley and KFCF in Fresno. Thank you for joining us. I'm Zoe Loftus-Farron, and I'm the host and producer of today's show. With the onset of spring, flowers are blooming here in the Bay Area. Wildflowers dot the hillsides, bulbs are coming up in backyards, and flower farms are entering a busy season. Flowers have much to offer. They bring us joy and beauty. They improve ecosystem health and can boost food production. They can improve moods and offer connection to nature. And they also play a role in cultural practices and in celebrations of love and life. Given all this, it's perhaps no surprise that we've developed a global flower industry, facilitating year-long access to perfect stems and popular flower varieties. But this industry comes at a cost. Many flowers are now grown using synthetic pesticides. They are shipped across borders, and then they are sold in plastic foam or plastic wrap or plastic ribbon. There are, of course, some who are charting a different path. Today, we have two guests with us to talk about sustainability in the flower industry. Pilar Zuniga is the owner and lead designer at Gorgeous and Green and the Sustainable Flower School in Oakland. She consults for the Ecology Center in Berkeley as well. Joanna Letts is the founder and owner-operator of Bluma Farms, which was located in Berkeley, and is currently conducting research on urban agriculture. Welcome, Pilar and Joanna, to Terra Verde.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
I want to start by asking each of you to tell us a bit more about your background and how you became involved in the sustainable flower movement and industry in the Bay Area. Pilar, maybe we can start with you first and how you found yourself engaged with flowers.
Thanks. Yeah. I actually found myself engaged. I was play on words. I was planning a wedding starting in around 2005. I was thinking about it. And from my own background, had been working in public health for quite some time and was an educator and really was looking at, healthy choices and healthy decision making in various sorts. And the person that I was marrying was coming from a place of great concern of sustainability. They had done some sustainability work. They were vegan. There was all kinds of stuff going on there. So I was kind of learning more about sustainability in other life places, and I was trying to plan a wedding within those confines. And at that time, there weren't a lot of options. There wasn't a lot of information on the webs. And so I just did research and I started a blog and was like, hey, what's up with this like fluorofoam stuff? And what's up with like pesticides? And how do I get organic flowers in my wedding? So doing that research, doing that work, I started to develop a business basically and started a business in 2008. So it was really like there wasn't a whole lot out there. It's a different place now, thankfully. We have a lot more information, but I was really like grasping at straws at that time.
Thank you. And Joanna, I want to ask you, I know you're not operating Bluma Farms right now, at least, and we may turn to that a little bit later, but can you tell us about how you started your farm and what you did there?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways I could answer this question. I'm also just remembering that Pilar was was my first florist customer. So that's just fun to be here with
Yeah, I love
you.
that.
I started farming in 2008, and I had the privilege to work an apprentice on a farm near Nevada City. And I got to apprentice on a couple different farms and then started my business in 2015. And yeah, I think a couple things to say on that. One of my closest friends, I went to Berkeley High. One of my closest friends from Berkeley High knew in high school she wanted to farm. And so after college, she encouraged me to get into farming. Another close friend who we may talk about a little bit is Zoe Hitchner, who also graduated with me at Berkeley High and runs the flower farm at Front Porch. So it's just kind of interesting. But I think like many of my peers and probably many people who are interested in getting into farming now, came from a desire to work outside and work with my hands and learn in a different way. And I think there's, for myself, working with plants has been a great, one of the great privileges of my life. And so once I started, I didn't look back. And then getting into flowers when I started my business, I mean, they're beautiful and wonderful. And they also make more money per square foot than pretty much any other crop that I could think of. And I knew I would never be a large farm and needed to compete in the Bay Area and where we also have a lot of vegetable farmers. I think that answers some of your question.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. Um, there are so many environmental impacts associated with the flower industry, farming, all of that. And one of those that you mentioned already, Pilar, was foam, specific to, arrangements in the flower industry. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so my growing up, my aunt was a florist. It was kind of her you know, like side hustle. And she used a lot of floral foam. And I remember as a kid, there would just be buckets of it. Well, first of all, she did all her designing in the kitchen, one, and there'd
Mhm.
be green dust everywhere. And then there'd be buckets full of like foam soaking. And I remember as a kid taking pieces of it and actually chewing on it and eating it. So, when it came time to really look into the floral industry, as I was, planning my own wedding, and then I started to like develop a business around it and be like, what's really going on here? It was like, oh yeah, that foam stuff. I know that's no good. I'm not going to use it, but let's find out more about it.
Mhm.
I see it wash up like, in the I would take my dogs to like the Berkeley kind of shore in the bay, and I'd see chunks of it wash up. We're literally like on the sand. And so I did more investigation, found at that time that one of the main producers had all their MSDS sheets, which are basically like once a manufacturer creates something, they need to create these safety data sheets so that people who are working with that product have information about how to take caution, what could harm them, what could be hazardous to their health or their local environment, potentially. Um, and so at the time, the main producer had all the MSDS sheets for all of their products online. So I was like, oh, look, here's a couple things that I've seen people use. And this is all the stuff. And I started to look into more detail. Oh, okay. It's basically like now we know microplastics that are compressed with gases, and some of those gases and chemicals are carcinogenic. And there's things like carbon and formaldehyde and some other stuff. And the MSDS sheets also said like, hey, it creates dust. Don't breathe that dust in. Because again, microplastics, and it becomes at that point, starts to break down, and it just like with exhaust from a vehicle can stuck in your lungs, cause asthma and probably other things. And then probably, if you're going to be touching it for long periods of time, wear gloves.
Mhm.
And, also dispose of it properly. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's crazy because sometimes I see people put the floral foam in the compost or they just throw it out in the yard. And at that time, there was even a recommendation from the manufacturers to put it in the dirt and mix it with the soil because it helped to aerate the soil. They don't
Wow.
say that anymore, but I was like, oh, okay, this is getting more complicated. So I actually put that MSDS sheet up on my blog. It got a lot of traction. A
Mhm.
lot of other florists from all over the place were like, "Oh, I knew there was something up with that." Or like, some people said, "I have these health issues and I'm going to go get checked, like to see if I've got some of this stuck in my lungs or
Mhm.
that kind of thing." So, um, since then there'd been the creation of other items that are better for the environment and people, which is great. But from the very beginning, I was like, okay, that's not something I'm going to use or bring into my studio.
Thank you. I know, yeah, that's great to hear more about that and your role kind of in drawing attention to it.
Yeah.
Um, Another, of course, big issue here is pesticide use, which can impact everyone from farmers and farm workers to florists to consumers. Joanna Bluma Farm was an organic flower farm. Can you speak at all to the pervasiveness of pesticides in the flower industry and how you managed without them?
Okay. So, and Pilar, correct me if anything I say is not accurate. But when I started, and I believe it's still true, that around 80% of the flowers in the US are imported. And looking at USD. And most of the flowers in the US, I believe, are coming from South America, where there is no regulations on pesticide use. So, I mean, I can't speak directly to the pesticides that are being used
Mhm,
on the flowers that we're getting, but they are there. And
mhm,
um, my farm has always been organic. I was trained as an organic farmer. It's really the reason I got into farming, right? Is to be of service to my community and be of service to the ecosystem and land tending. And I was thinking about pesticide use in the US in thinking about this conversation, and that I was reminded from talking to a friend that there's still a an untrue notion that we need pesticides or we need chemical pesticides and chemical fertilizers to grow crops. And it's just not true. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I can speak to my farm. Um, when I started on land in outside the city in near a town called Sunol, and I was growing in the soil. So it's a little different when I was growing on a rooftop. But really, my main job was to take care of the soil. And in so doing, I was taking care of the plants. You know, the things that really brought me the most joy was thinking about compost and compost application and cover cropping. And those were the two things that like really enlivened my work in addition to getting to be witness to all the pollinators that came and visited my flowers, and people. So the human and non-human world that got to enjoy the flowers in place as well
mhm,
as after they were cut. And I guess I'll just speak to that, you know, I think most of the listeners are aware how important our pollinators are. And when we use pesticides, those pesticides not only get on humans and in the waterways, but also affect the pollinators. So it's important to be thinking about,
mhm,
and I'll just share a couple resources, which is the Xerces Society is a great organization to check out, and also the
mhm.
Pesticide Action Network has a lot of information about like things that are also happening in the US right now.
Thank you. And I
Yeah.
I remember when we spoke, yesterday you mentioned that, pollinators would even find you as you moved your flowers throughout the city. And I thought that was just really telling about the role that these flowers play.
Totally.
Um,
Thank you.
I do want to remind listeners I'm Zoe Loftus-Farron, and you're tuned in to Terra Verde. Today, we're talking about the environmental footprint of flowers and how to build more sustainability within the industry. We're here with Pilar Zuniga, the owner and lead designer at Gorgeous and Green and the Sustainable Flower School in Oakland, and urban ag researcher and Bluma Farm founder and owner operator Joanna Letts. So, there are other impacts we could talk about, but climate and carbon emissions of shipping being one of them. I do, though, want to turn now towards your experiences charting a different path in the industry. Pilar, maybe we'll start again with you and what you experienced in your many years in the industry now, as far as consumer expectations around flower appearance and flower variety, and how that matches up with locally and seasonally available options.
Yeah, it's a big, it's a big drive for business. It's getting folks to actually buy your products. So, you know, luckily, maybe I had a couple things going for me in that I'm stubborn and I started off as an educator. So I realized that there needed to be I needed to educate consumers and I needed to educate my clients. So, or potential clients. And so I did that right off the bat. I was a pretty heavy blogger. I don't do that as much anymore because it's just so much, it's so time consuming and it's a lot harder to get in on and get attention nowadays. But back in the day when I first started, I got, there wasn't a lot out there. So when I started a blog, people were listening. So I could really start to educate, and I used my website to really say, like, this is the reasoning why I'm making these decisions. Um, and once you get people on board and realize that what they're paying for is that service, they're paying for that knowledge, all information and education that I've used for myself and all of the work I've done to figure out how to do this sustainably, as well as the decisions I'm making, which are harder. It's a lot more work. So that they're paying for that as well as, beautiful flowers. And then on top of that, I developed my own style, my own look, and taught myself to be a better florist. So over time, they were like, I love what you're doing. I love your art. And I love all of the work you're doing to be sustainable. And so that's why, I have a clientele, is because I've done all of that extra work. And really, like when you go to my website, you kind of get hit over the head continuously by kind of my methodology. That also allows me to say, I can't do this. No and yes. And that's, when I talk to folks about when I'm teaching, we use it in the classes that I offer through the Sustainable Flower School. It's the biggest thing is learning how to say no, but what can you say yes to? Like, no, I can't get you that flower in December because honestly, like, even though California is great, I think we produce like 76% of American grown or United States grown flowers. Um, but they're literally like December, January, November, even February, when Valentine's Day comes, like really not a lot of product out there. So giving people kind of that like reasoning for why you're making the decision is super important.
And Joanna, I know you're not farming at the time being, and much of that had to do with, it sounds like, some of the real challenges involved in urban agriculture. And now you're doing research on the subject, and I'm wondering, based on your own experience and what you've been learning through that recent research, how you think we can better support urban farmers and urban agriculture.
Ooh.
In a brief summary.
Just a little question. Um, I mean, I guess one thing as Pilar was talking that I wrote down to remind myself is like, how do we create a cultural shift? And again, like I think listeners to the show, and there has been and is a shift towards wanting to buy local and supporting local farms and supporting local flower farms, and there's still something missing. And I think maybe one thing I'm thinking about is specifically in urban ag, like how do we create the cultural shift, but also the power behind that to support farmers both in an urban setting and rural setting? And that in part is land access, and not just land access, but land tenure. So I don't know how much, I probably won't share too much about my specific farming situation, but the land tenure piece was part of that.
Mhm.
And then uh, how there's in all, I mean, in so much of our commerce, but specifically in agriculture, well, one, that there's slim margins, and people know, yet, right, that farming is economically hard. But how do we really, like, I don't know if it's like break that down more, or like what can we do, tangibly do, to make that different? And I think maybe that's part of some sort of cultural shift. I think some of the things that could be part of that is just having these types of conversations where we're like, okay, here's the price of flowers, which, as I said before, make more money per square foot, and yet why is it still so hard to make the numbers work? And I think as we think about sustainability and supporting local farms, we have to not forget, or like not leave the farmers out of the conversation. And there's a paradox here that I was thinking about in this conversation I had recently with a friend as part of some of my research, is the paradox of cheap food. And this includes flowers, of like, I want flowers to be accessible, right? I don't want to charge a crazy amount. And yet, even the prices I can get, which is not affordable to everyone, is not really enough to sustain an agricultural business, and especially one in the city. So, what do we do? And I think those are the things we should be talking about. Some things could be more federal support, which obviously isn't happening in our current political climate, thinking about the Farm Bill, and then specific state things and citywide things we could do. For example, California just finished the Land Equity Task Force report, so that is available online. You could check it out. So there's things happening, and I think we just
Mhm.
need to be talking about it more.
Yeah, thank you. I know that was
Yeah.
a big question, but that that was helpful. And I think I agree. Talking about it is an important step. Pilar, kind of a similar question, building on this, as one or both of you has mentioned, like the idea of sustainable local flowers has gained some traction since you both first got started. But it hasn't quite, caught on in the same way as local food and other local farming more broadly, perhaps. Um, how do you think what's the deal there, and how can we get this issue, if people are purchasing flowers, if this is something they can afford, if it's part of their routine, to look for more sustainable options?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult thing. I think there's been a lot of traction around the local food movement. So I think that we can kind of mimic that. People are familiar. There's a couple resources. One is Slow Flowers. Deborah Prinzing has been wrote a book a lot about this and has kind of gotten florists together because it also starts with, being able to provide the offerings. And not just florists, but flower farmers, and creating kind of a network and support system there. But it's difficult because I think, yeah, people need to know that to the same processes and decision making that they use around other parts of their life, they can use for when it comes to flowers. And just talking about all the benefits, and we're talking about supporting local local economy, local business, but also like literally like local environment that could actually be healthy for the air and people. So I think really kind of changing their mindset and doing some due diligence, doing some question asking, not taking anything for granted, not making the assumptions. When you see a bouquet of flowers that you really like at the grocery store, the assumption I would make is that they're from far away and that they're full of pesticides. The people that grew them probably didn't get paid very well, and it's maybe not the best thing for the local environment where they came from. So, you gotta ask some follow-up questions. Are they, at the very least, fair trade? Did that company decide to pay their people better? Are they taking steps to use less chemicals? Can they get local grown? Can they get California grown? Can they get, grown in the United States? So really going past, going a little bit further into that uncomfortable place.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think you both have raised so many good points. I can't believe we are already out of time in this discussion. So I want to thank you both, Pilar and Joanna, for joining us today. I want to also thank our board operator, Kirsten Thomas, and everyone at KPFA who makes Terra Verde possible. And of course, a big thank you to all our listeners and supporters. Our music is by David Michelle Ruddy. You can find Terra Verde and other KPFA programs archived on the KPFA website. And you can also find Terra Verde on the Earth Island Journal website as the Earth Island Journal podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and please do tune in again next week.
Steal This Story, Please. Sunday, April 19th at 6:30 p.m. at the Rialto Elmwood in Berkeley. A new documentary on Amy Goodman, followed by a live interview with W. Kamau Bell, introduced by KPFA's Brian Edwards Teaker. A portrait of journalism committed to truth-telling across decades of conflict, resistance, and change, from the front lines to the daily work of Democracy Now! A night of film, journalism, celebration, and conversation. More info at kpfa.org.
This is 94.1 KPFA and 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, everywhere at kpfa.org.
KPFA.